listener production.
Hello, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Have we just witnessed one of the biggest technological achievements in our lifetimes? Microsoft has revealed a new quantum computer chip, and an Australian team has been pivotal in its creation.
Australia has, for many years, invested in quantum technologies. Almost for 30 years, and we were ahead of the game.
What this means for the world, both good and bad, coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, it's time for the headlines with Chris Spiru on Wednesday, February 26.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody. Peter Dutton is denying he engaged in insider trading during the global financial crisis after Labor dredged up the allegations. This story broke on news.com.au yesterday and revealed the now opposition leader notified Parliament of a share buying blitz involving the big banks the day before Labor announced a bailout in 2009. The allegation is that Dutton could have had knowledge the bailout was coming, and that informed his decision to buy shares in the banks.
Dutton has responded only through a spokesperson, slamming the claims as a Labor smear campaign and saying, quote, Mr Dutton had no access to any sensitive information on these matters, nor was he privy to government briefing on the GFC. Now, Liberal senators too have reacted quite angrily to these allegations. Here's how it played out between the Finance Minister, Katie Gallagher, and the Coalition's Jane Hume and James McGrath yesterday.
We have questions.
You're throwing mud at Peter Dutton. That's all you've got.
Grubby.
It's
so grubby, Minister. You're better than that, apparently. Well, it was just a coincidence, was it, that there was a lot of shares purchased the day before a bank bailout?
Say it outside this room.
Go
what
on.
a coincidence.
Go on.
A happy coincidence.
You're using parliamentary privilege. You're using Howard's Castle to defame the leader of the opposition.
Oh, I love that Parliament's back. I love it so much.
Yeah, so the calls of Coward's Castle there refer to the fact that politicians are protected from being sued for defamation when speaking in Parliament. Under parliamentary privilege.
Anthony Albanese has also commented on the saga. He was asked if Labor actually thought Dutton had engaged in insider trading while campaigning in Sydney yesterday. The Prime Minister responding with, that's a matter for Peter Dutton to explain. Interestingly, Sash, I'm watching the reaction, by political watchdogs and all these people who are so fascinated in politics, and they're saying Dutton is doing what Dutton does best when stuff hits the fan, and he's just taking cover, laying low, hoping that it'll all blow over, but I don't know. I don't think this is going away.
Well, I mean, he's responded through a spokesperson. There's a campaign to be fought, so he can't stay hiding for too long. I think that at the end of the day, this happens, right? This happens in the lead up to an election. Both sides of politics, all sides of politics like to drag things up and try and make a big deal out of one thing or another. But at the end of the day, our elected representatives are in extremely privileged positions, and if there are questions, the man who wants to be the next Prime Minister of Australia should be willing to come forward and say, yep, have a look into it. I'm very confident that I followed all the correct rules and I had no insider knowledge, which is exactly what he has said. But I think hiding from this issue isn't going to help his case in the election campaign. So to Labor's point, if there are questions that are being asked, then they probably should just be answered.
The ABC says it spent $1.1 million on external lawyers in its unfair dismissal case brought by our friend and colleague Antoinette Lattouf. A reminder, Antoinette is suing the public broadcaster after she was taken off air 3 days into a 5-day stint on ABC Radio Sydney back in December 2023. This happened after she reposted a Human Rights Watch report accusing Israel of using starvation as a tool of war. The ABC's acting managing director, Melanie Klein, told a parliamentary committee yesterday the ABC did not sack her, but did have lessons to learn. When quizzed as to whether the broadcaster regretted not settling the case for $85,000 and a public apology back in July last year, this is what she had to say.
Would the ABC have preferred not to spend $1.1 million? The answer to that is yes. That's why we have attempted to settle the matter on a number of occasions.
Also appearing yesterday was the ABC's Chief People Officer, Dina Amorelli, who told Senate estimates the broadcaster will apologise for its legal argument that Antoinette had to prove the existence of a Lebanese race. After facing significant backlash, both internally and externally, the legal argument was dropped, Amorelli saying it should never have been made. Now, the case will return to the federal court tomorrow for closing submissions, and this all comes amid allegations by former Chair Ita Buttrose that there are inconsistencies between her evidence and that of outgoing Managing Director David Anderson. Both had taken to the stand during proceedings. So, Chris, to wrap that all up, in terms of a verdict, which we know Antoinette was really desperate to get to, and I'm sure a lot of people are, we can expect to wait a few more months before the judge delivers his findings.
And federal employees in the US have hit back at, you guessed it, Elon Musk and Donald Trump after they were told to justify their jobs or be sacked. Hackers have taken over the TVs inside the Department of Housing and Urban Development, displaying AI images of the president licking and kissing the feet of the first buddy. Over the top of the looping video were the words, "Long live the real king," and the real king being Musk. A HUD spokesperson has issued a statement saying the stunt abused taxpayer resources and the department was planning to investigate and fire those responsible.
Yeah, this hit my TikTok feed yesterday.
Same.
This was not on my Trump 2.0 bingo card.
It's so weird.
At all. Look, this all played out as the deadline was reached for 2.3 million US federal employees to respond to an email which asked them to lay out what they'd achieved at work in the previous week. Musk, as head of the new Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, has been tasked with slimming down the US's federal workforce. And according to reports, AI will be used to go through these responses. But it's also understood a lot of employees did not respond to the email after being told by their bosses not to. You know, Elon Musk playing such a big role in this Trump administration, like I said, is just not something that I think anyone really anticipated when Musk was angling for this role. Remember, he was doing this quite early in the election campaign. He was saying that he wanted to get involved and he wanted to slim down the US federal workforce. And I don't know, I just don't think anyone, I think it was like when Trump first said he was going to run, no one took it seriously. Yeah. And now with this, it's like, I wasn't taking Elon seriously when he was first saying all this. And now there's AI images of his feet being leaked by the president. I can't.
Yeah, it's a lot. And I mean, it is really silly, but what people are keeping their eye on is this relationship between Trump and Musk, especially now that Musk is getting a lot of attention and a lot of the spotlight. A lot of people are predicting that this isn't going to end well because at the end of the day, the allegation is that Donald Trump is a bit of an attention seeker, for better choice of words, and that this is a bit of a threat to, you know, him making headlines and there's a real chance that Elon might just overtake him when it comes to popularity.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see. Yeah, I think as well he's, you know, the theory is that he's a narcissist and so he won't like someone taking all of this attention off him. You're right. Chris, thank you. Coming up, we've got Helen Smith's deep dive into a brand new quantum computer chip and what it means for us and the world's technology.
What would the world look like with a computer that could accurately model the laws of nature? That's the promise of quantum computing, but there have always been limitations. Now, as one of our longest running research projects, our team at Microsoft has been able to take a subatomic particle that has only been theorized until now, and not only observe it, but control it, creating an entirely new material and a new architecture for quantum computing.
What you just heard there was part of an announcement by Microsoft last week in relation to quantum computing. It's a computer that can solve and tackle problems that others can't, and it's all based off quantum physics. But what's behind a quantum chip and how much work goes into making one? And when could we see these computers come to life? Professor David Reilly is a University of Sydney quantum physicist who's worked for Microsoft on the development of this exact quantum computer chip and is now leading the charge here in Australia. David, can you give me the top line explainer on what quantum physics is?
Quantum physics is the best description that we have for everything, for reality. It's sort of home or natural home is the realm of atoms and electrons and photons that is the nanoscale. But quantum physics originally describes the concept that energy is quantized. And so this word quantum comes from a packet or a quanta, a discrete chunk of energy. And the physics of quantum mechanics, which dates back to around about 100 years ago, really is a mind-bending, in some ways, theory that describes pretty much everything that our world is built from. Now, this is a very successful theory. It's never been shown to be incorrect. And we've built so many technologies from it, ranging from semiconductors to lasers and many other things. But along with the technological implications, quantum physics is also counterintuitive and quite bizarre. At the core of it, it says that everything, including what we're made out of, has a wave-like character. Now, that's really hard to get your head around. Maybe for a moment, just to take you through perhaps how that sort of was established. If you go back in time to 100 years ago, almost to the day, Einstein had, in fact, shown that photons, that is light, had this sort of character, or it had a personality that shows up sometimes looking like a wave. So phenomena like interference, diffraction, these are wave-like properties. If you throw a rock into a pond, you'll see those ripples. Light looks like that. It's an oscillating electromagnetic field, but spreads out just like water waves, so wave-like. Einstein showed that light also sometimes shows up like a particle, like a quanta, a photon, a clump, a packet. So somehow light has both of these personalities, wave-like, particle-like. And a lot of people have heard of that before. Physicists call that a wave-particle duality. The essence of quantum physics, quantum mechanics, is the realization and the description of nature using wave-like phenomena. And that's very hard to get your head around, but that enables all of these technologies.
So why is this such a significant kind of announcement and breakthrough that we could be years away from a quantum computer, not decades?
The computers we have at the moment are digital. And we transitioned from this analog wave-like approach to computing at the end of the sort of 1970s. And I think everyone's familiar with that idea of, watching television in a former era where signals were transmitted as analog signals, and now we transmit information digitally and we have these crisp, clear pictures. So the similar approaches underpinning all of our computing systems today, they're digital systems. It comes at a tremendous overhead, though, and in fact is very limiting to process information that way. And quantum computers can potentially solve certain types of problems that will never be solvable with a digital conventional computer. No matter how big it is or how fast it is, you won't be able to reach that. But the drawback is, if you go back to analog systems, then you're susceptible to noise. And so quantum computers are, in fact, inherently susceptible to noise. The noise keeps wanting to make this wave-like character back to regular, boring, conventional, classical physics. So it destroys the quantumness. The breakthrough that we're hearing about in the last week and earlier results over the last few months is really trying to kind of move towards a way of protecting and encoding quantum information that is wave-like properties in a way that's now robust to noise. And so that's a big deal because it allows us to have our cake and eat it too. We want to be able to compute using waves, compute using quantum mechanics, but we want to be able to either suppress noise, detect noise, or reject noise in order to build robust systems that ultimately scale.
So are Microsoft really leading the race to build a quantum computer?
Microsoft has for many years taken a very different approach to the mainstream. Some 15 years ago or more realized that it could be very important if you could build a sort of device, a nanoscale quantum device in such a way that it was almost intrinsically immune to the noise. What if you made the actual physical hardware itself a lot less susceptible to noise? And the approach that they have been taking for now nearly 2 decades is to take a sort of aspect of mathematics, a branch of mathematics called topology, which is really the kind of description of certain properties of shapes and so on that are not changed even in the presence of noise or what you'd call deformation. And the classic example here, it's kind of slightly amusing, is that to a topologist, a coffee cup and a donut are effectively the same. They both have one hole. And so you could imagine if you had a plasticine or Play-Doh donut, squishing and squeezing it and pulling the hole out to the side and try to squeeze it into something that looks like a coffee cup. You could sort of do that without creating or destroying a hole. And so imagine encoding information in like the properties of whether there's a hole or not. It doesn't matter whether the system is being squeezed or squished or twisted, so long as you haven't created or destroyed a new hole, it remains the same.
Is it a good or bad thing that a massive US conglomerate like Microsoft is building this tech?
Well, for me, I worked for the company for 8 years, and before that was deeply involved in the project as a consultant. And I always have believed that building a quantum computer is just a really daunting task that will require tremendous resources. And if you think about building a modern computer chip that we have millions of, they're already pretty sophisticated and require cutting-edge foundries such as TSMC or Samsung or Intel, global foundries and so on. These foundries are not in Australia. And in fact, they're very limited in terms of access worldwide. So that's just for the computers we have today. When you're talking about building something as complex and sophisticated as a quantum computer, I think that it's really only the very large technology companies that in some ways can sort of advance the frontier there. So for me, that was an important driver and a reason why I, was with the program. On the other hand, I've sort of, having experienced that, I think the world's changing, and certainly it's a very complex problem, but one where I'm now seeing a lot more collaboration. And in fact, rather than a single tech company, I'm seeing a community and an ecosystem collectively advance the frontier there. So to answer your question, it's there's a backdrop here of geopolitics. There's a backdrop of what's happening in the world at the moment. And certainly in Australia, my decision to, in fact, leave the company and stay in Australia was born out of a desire to create something now in Australia that certainly plays on a world stage. It's not totally locked up and isolated in Australia. It will engage with the largest tech companies, the largest foundries, but also all of the other more custom development houses across the world in order to pull it all together and start to realize, these technologies. And I think that that's the right kind of approach to take in the coming decades.
Technology really is changing the world faster than humans can really control. What does this kind of technology mean for the world? And what were some of those problems that you were saying before that quantum computing can solve that others just can't?
To give you I think, real honest and hype-free answer to that, I have to step back for a moment and just make the sort of obvious point that, as we discussed in the beginning, quantum physics describes reality. What we're made of, all of our technologies, ultimately rest on quantum physics. In other words, the physics of which the world is doing its thing is built from these wave-like properties. That's the language of nature, quantum physics. So it kind of makes sense that if you want to simulate or capture that complexity of nature, then the computer that you're building should also be built from the same wave-like properties of quantum physics. So with that in mind, you're pairing now the physics of the computer with the physics of the system you're trying to compute. So if you want to study things that are built from quantum physics, molecules, atoms, photons of light, efficient solar cells, new drugs, new chemicals, new material systems, and so on, well, those systems are built from quantum physics. They are described by quantum physics. Doesn't it make sense to build a computer that's built from the same underlying physics? that gives us a power then to understand and model these systems in a way we can't do with conventional computers. So for me, that's ultimately where I draw the inspiration. There are a lot of examples one can point to where already we know if you had a large-scale quantum computer, you could go and attack certain types of problems. And those are very exciting, particularly in the chemistry and material space. But I really think that the best is yet to come. It's like trying to ask, people inventing the transistor in 1947 whether they could imagine, scrolling reels late at night with their phone. It's humans are not good at prediction, particularly those that are in the future. So we have to wait and see.
If this quantum computer comes around within the next 10 years or so, what would happen if it falls into unsafe hands? Could it have the potential to cause more harm than good?
Look, that's definitely a real concern for many people working in this field. I think many of us recognize that this technology has broad implications. There are aspects related to security and cryptography. That's certainly it's been a very important driver for a lot of the work in the field. But equally, materials are underpinning pretty much all of our technologies, both in defense, obviously, but in dual use areas as well. It's breakthroughs in materials, breakthroughs in chemistry that often then underpin other technological advances. So yes, you ultimately can imagine this technology being used both to create new life-saving drugs or new chemicals that would allow us to grow crops in regions that are currently very difficult to feed the planet and so on. But equally, there are obvious applications of this technology that could lead to harm. And so I think, like all technologies, we need structures and frameworks that allow us to regulate and manage the use and dissemination of those technologies. Very much like AI, though, I think the big challenge here is just the rate of progress. We're moving very quickly, and there's a very limited number of people on the planet that can really understand where we are and what those implications look like. And I'm seeing that sort of number of people with the expertise shrinking and kind of getting locked up into other opportunities and positions. So I think it's a bottleneck of people and know-how that ultimately is the one to watch in order to be able to understand and predict ahead of time how this technology is used.
Could Australian scientists become the leaders of quantum computer development?
Australia has, for many years, invested in quantum technologies, almost for 30 years. And we were ahead of the game. There were efforts here in Sydney, at the University of New South Wales, at the University of Queensland, and elsewhere that really put this technology on the map. And those efforts set a foundation for now what's in Australia a very significant worldwide effort. So, Australia has to pick winners in some sense and focus on the things that it has some critical mass in. And quantum computing, quantum technologies is one of those areas. It would be hard to find another city in the world comparable to Sydney in terms of the critical mass of talent and capability in quantum computing.
David, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing.
My pleasure.
That was Professor David Reilly there from the University of Sydney. And I think a really interesting topic that he touched on there was the relationship between academics and almost government and tech makers, and the relationship that really I think is an important one to foster. But that's it for this episode of The Briefing. Before you go though, we'd love it if you could share this app with someone else you think might enjoy it as well. It really is the easiest way you can support us and all that we do here at The Briefing. And if you want to check us out on socials, you can head to our Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, just search for Listener Newsroom. I'm Helen Smith. See you next time.
Listener.